Father John Wauck, it's great to see you and thank you very much for giving us your time.
Good to be here today.
This October, 60th anniversary of the opening of the Second Vatican Council.
Right.
Bring us back and remind us, why was this council called and how momentous was this occasion?
Of course, I wasn't around when the Second Vatican Council was called. In fact, I was born during the council in early 1964. But I think in order to understand the council, you have to think of the situation of especially Europe and the church after the two world wars of the first part of the century. So there was a sense that we're starting again in the late 1950s. The wars were over, and the church was looking around at the world and saying, we need to begin again in our relationship with the world that's the new world that we find ourselves living in. And the church obviously has been around for 2,000 years, but there's a sense that this is a new epoch that's beginning, and we need to adjust ourselves, open ourselves to the new reality of the world today, the modern world.
And what were some of the challenges that they were trying to address or problems they were trying to fix? Because as you said, post-World War II, the world had peace, what it longed for. The church, kind of in those decades, was at a golden age, great attendance, lots of seminarians coming in. So what was the problem?
The council wasn't really about addressing challenges. It was about taking advantage of opportunities. That I think the peacetime after the world wars was seen as a golden opportunity for the church to engage with the world. And the church was blessed with many vocations at that time. There were great artists and intellectuals who were Catholic, living and active in that period. So this is a momentous event in the life of the church, an ecumenical council where everyone is brought to, all the bishops are brought to Rome to discuss the life of the church. But it was, as I say, a moment of great hope. And the dogmatic constitution, Lumen Gentium, on the nature of the church is really kind of the principal document of the council, and it's Lumen Gentium, the light of the peoples, and the church is presenting itself in that way, the light of the world.
Yeah, that was one of the more revolutionary, if we can use that word, things to come out of this council, and that was what, that the lay people, their role within the church.
Well, you know, a key part of the message of Lumen Gentium, that dogmatic constitution on the church, was chapter 5, which is about the universal call to holiness. And the idea was that every single Christian, by virtue of being baptized, was actually called to the perfection of charity and the perfection of the fullness of the Christian life.
And then other changes that I'd introduced or brought about, things like, I know, of course, Latin is still the official language of the church, but now masses could be celebrated in local languages. Lay people would have more readings in the mass and so on and so forth. How were these received at the time, these revolutionary changes that were being made in the church?
Well, I think people were interested, as I say, in opening up the church as much as possible to the modern world. And the idea of having Mass, say, in the vernacular languages was part of that. It wasn't about getting rid of Latin. In fact, the council documents say, we should, learn Latin and the Gregorian chant and things like that. It's not against that.
So it's not doing away with tradition, but it's
opening up to people who don't understand Latin, and making it as easy and accessible as possible for the people of today to enter into the mystery of the church, and in this case, the mystery of the Eucharist. That was the idea, right? And that was received, I think, at the beginning, certainly with great optimism.
And isn't that one of the points of contention for some Catholics, many Catholics, when they look at something like the Second Vatican Council, and they would say, well, look, this is the church succumbing to modernism of the world and turning its back on thousands of years of teachings and traditions?
Of course, the council, the Second Vatican Council, didn't change any dogmas. I mean, it explicitly says that it's not about changing the teaching of the church. And it's an expression of fidelity to the tradition of the church. So it should be read in that way. And that's the controversy that Pope Benedict, for instance, weighed in on in terms of what he called the hermeneutic of continuity. He was part of the council, and he said the proper way to read the council is in continuity with what came before, not as a break with what came before.
It shouldn't be taken on its own, but in the context of what's come before it and since it.
As part of the continuity of the life of the church. not as a break or a rupture.
Father John, why do you think it still is today that many Catholics around the world look at the Second Vatican Council? Some embrace the spirit of it, while others still look at it with suspicion.
Well, I think if you read the documents of the Council, you'll come away with a very different impression than you would get from the way people talk about the Council. The way the Council was presented in the media, for instance, is quite different from what's in the texts. And the way it was presented, say, in the late 1960s, after the Council was over, when there was implementation of the Council, and many things were justified in terms of, well, the Council has said this, we can do this now, right? And in the 1970s, the same thing. And there were many deviations, really, from liturgical practice, doctrinal questions as well, in the 60s and 70s. So the Council dovetailed with a cultural revolution in society that also affected the life of the Church.
You mentioned the media coverage, which is fascinating, around the Second Vatican Council, because we know today, unfortunately, we have a very polarized news media in many parts of the world, particularly the United States. But this was even the case back then, wasn't it? When we kind of saw for the first time this divide, where did you stand in the Church, how it was interpreted, and also the people involved, the cardinals and so on, were put into different brackets, kind of for the first time publicly.
The Second Vatican Council was the first television era council. First radio era as well, but it was the first council that was conducted in a context of modern media coverage. Constant daily reporting was possible, and it was quite natural that people would take advantage of that. People who had their own agenda of what they thought the Church should be doing or where the Church should be going, and it wasn't just the media. I mean, sometimes people blame the media for the misinterpretation of the Council. But the media was being used by people often in the Council. In other words, not necessarily cardinals or bishops, but frequently the people around them, the so-called periti, the experts. They would have informal press conferences, basically guiding the media coverage.
Father John Wauck, it was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.